Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. In the small, tightly knit community of Pinewood, Oregon, the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long shadows that danced across the weathered porches of unassuming homes. It was the kind of town where doors were seldom locked, and neighbors exchanged warm greetings on their morning walks. The tranquility, however, masked an unsettling undercurrent, a palpable tension that had begun to grip Pinewood as dusk settled in. On a seemingly tranquil Sunday evening in early October, the community was rocked by a phone call that would shake its foundations. Julie Anderson, a beloved school teacher and mother of two, was reported missing after failing to return home from her routine trip to the local grocery store. The market sat just a few blocks from her quaint, white shingled house, a walk that took her mere minutes. But hours had passed, and the shadows grew longer. Pinewood's residents rallied, spreading the word through social media and organizing search parties that scoured wooded paths and neighboring streets. With every hour that ticked by, hope began to drain, replaced by the clenching fear that something sinister had occurred. As twilight gave way to the darkness of night, the once serene streets transformed into an unsettling silence, punctuated only by the murmur of frantic voices. Detective Mark Hastings, a seasoned investigator with over 2 decades on the force, arrived at the scene. The flickering lights from police cruisers illuminated the concerned faces of those involved, and Hastings could sense the weight of despair in the air. He scanned the crowd, noting the tight-knit relationships that bound them together, all of whom were now facing the specter of dread that had seeped into their lives. In the absence of answers, questions loomed. What could have happened to Julie Anderson? And why did she vanish without a trace? The investigation was just beginning, and the journey into the depths of Pinewood's secrets had only just begun. The victim. Julie Anderson was more than just a school teacher. She was a beacon within Pinewood, adored by her students and respected by parents. At 36, her luminous smile and infectious laughter served as a comforting constant in the lives of those who crossed her path. With 2 young children, 11-year-old Liam and 7-year-old Zoe, she worked tirelessly, balancing motherhood with her passion for educating. Parents often described her as possessing an uncanny ability to connect with children of all backgrounds, nurturing their potential and instilling confidence. As investigators delved deeper into Julie's life, they encountered a portrait of warmth and dedication. She volunteered at the town library, hosted weekend bake sales for the local school, and was actively involved in the Parent-Teacher Association. Evenings found her curled up with a good book, a cup of chamomile tea in hand, often planning lessons or brainstorming ideas for her classroom. To outsiders, her life appeared idyllic. The quintessential suburban lifestyle with a supportive husband, Mark, who worked as a software engineer. Yet, beneath the surface, complexities emerged. Friends noted subtle changes in Julie's demeanor over the past few months. She seemed more restless, her laughter often tinged with an undercurrent of worry. During casual conversations, she had briefly mentioned feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of work and family, though she never pinpointed a specific source of her anxiety. As investigators talked with those closest to her, a picture began to form not just of a victim, but of a woman grappling with invisible burdens. The wholesome facade of Pinewood began to crack, revealing the possibility that not all demons were external. Was it simple stress? Or could there be more to Julie's sudden disappearance? The town that once enveloped her in comfort now suspected its very own heart had been touched by darkness. The more they uncovered, the more pressing the questions became. Had Julie made an enemy, or faced a circumstance that spiraled beyond her control? The search for answers had taken on a new urgency, and Detective Hastings knew that every detail mattered. The clock was ticking, and time was running out for Julie Anderson. The crime scene. With the first light of dawn breaking through the trees, a sense of urgency permeated the air as Detective Mark Hastings arrived at the scene where Julie Anderson's car had been found. It was parked haphazardly at the far edge of a local grocery store lot, partially concealed by thick foliage that flanked the entrance. The vehicle was locked, the interior untouched, leaving little evidence of a struggle. Yet, the eerie stillness spoke volumes. It was as if the car stood as a silent witness to a crime yet understood. Hastings examined the surroundings, his keen eyes scanning for details that could provide insight. Pinewood Market, a modest brick building adorned with flower boxes, offered a stark contrast to the unsettling situation at hand. Security footage from the store had already been secured, but the ensuing investigation had revealed that the last recorded sighting of Julie occurred just before closing time the previous evening. The camera captured her entering the store, alone and evidently in good spirits, but there was no film to provide clarity about her departure. As Hastings maneuvered past the car, he edged toward the woods behind the market. Footprints marked the damp earth, leading deeper into the thicket. A number of officers carefully combed the area, searching for anything that might have been overlooked. The haunting specter of possibility loomed large. Cold. Julie had been taken against her will, or did she willingly follow someone into the darkening woods? The air was heavy with the scent of pine and damp soil, but beneath it lingered a metallic tang of apprehension. Hastings' instincts told him that the answer lay in these woods, yet he remained grounded. Rushing to conclusions could prove detrimental. He needed to maintain clarity, to focus on the details. Suddenly, one of the younger officers called out, having discovered something. Kneeling beside a cluster of bushes, he uncovered a small silver locket, half buried in the leaf litter. Hastings approached, his heart pounding in anticipation. The delicate jewel bore an inscription, one that hinted at personal significance. Was this locket Julie's? Had it been lost during a struggle or consciously discarded? The implications were unsettling. This small piece of evidence could hold the key to understanding what had truly transpired on that fateful night. The crime scene was beginning to unfold, layer by layer, yet the picture remained maddeningly unclear. As Hastings surveyed the area, he knew one thing for certain. The darkness of the woods held secrets, and it was his job to uncover them. The early investigation. With the discovery of the locket, Detective Hastings felt the pulse of urgency quicken. This newfound clue warranted further scrutiny. He had the locket collected and tagged as evidence, its potential significance looming large in his mind. The sun had made its ascent, filling the sky with light, but the shadows of uncertainty lingered. The early hours of the investigation unfolded with a relentless pace. Hastings convened with his team, each officer assigned specific tasks, aimed at piece by piece, revealing the remnants of Julie's last hours. They began to interview anyone who had seen her in the days leading up to her disappearance. In Pinewood, every neighbor and acquaintance seemed to meld into the community tapestry, and Hastings aimed to untangle that web. At the diner, a small, cozy establishment bustling with patrons, Hastings found a steady stream of witnesses lining up to share their stories. One waitress, Lily, recalled seeing Julie the prior week, sitting alone at a corner booth, seemingly lost in thought. She looked anxious, like something was swaying heavily on her mind, Lily said, her brow furrowed. The statement lingered in Hastings' mind, raising additional questions about Julie's state of mind. In the following hours, Hastings convened with Julie's husband, Mark. They walked through the memories that painted their life together, a stark juxtaposition to the spiraling chaos they now face. Mark described their last family dinner, an ordinary evening filled with laughter. But when he mentioned her growing fatigue, Hastings picked up on a flicker of something deeper, a guardedness that blossomed into refreshment at the sight of his wife's unwavering devotion. Through each conversation, a recurring theme began to emerge. Julie had recently been dealing with an unspecified source of stress, though no one knew its origin. This left Hastings with a mounting feeling that this job could become much more complicated, cloaked with layers that hid more than they revealed. As afternoon sun filtered through the trees, Hastings took a brief respite at Pinewood Park, a neural gathering space of picnics and playground laughter crushed by the weight of the investigation. Observing families enjoying the day, the stark contrast of their carefree existence against the turmoil surrounding his case mounted his resolve. Somewhere, deep within the comforting facade of this picturesque town, lay truths yet unexamined, hidden sources of potential risk that Julie might have encountered. The threads began to interweave, but Hastings knew each effort to reconnect them would lead to deeper, darker secrets. As dusk approached once more, so did an unsettling realization. This was not just about rescue. It was about accountability. If Julie Anderson had faltered in any capacity, so too had the community that cheerfully surrounded her. In Pinewood, no one could remain untouched by this fateful event. Hastings felt an unyielding drive to ensure that the darkness hiding under the serene surface of Pinewood would not prevail. Not now, not ever. The dead ends. Days turned into a week, yet the search for Julie Anderson yielded minimal progress. Each lead seemed promising at first, only to fade into disappointment, like drops of rain that evaporated before reaching the ground. Detectives combed through social media, scoured the edges of town, and re-interviewed witnesses. But as time wore on, the sense of urgency began to give way to frustration. The locket had revealed little. Forensic analysis confirmed it belonged to Julie, but its significance was unclear. Thoughts swirled in Hastings' mind, every piece of evidence undone by unanswered questions. Had Julie been in a relationship that strained her marriage? The creeping thought nagged at him. Mark had shown no signs of anger or distress beyond the normal realms of loss. But his refusals to delve into Julie's recent struggles suggested a deeper conflict. Hastings knew he needed to broach the subject again, but it was tangled with the very vulnerabilities they were attempting to untangle. Meanwhile, they reached out to individuals connected to Julie's life beyond Pinewood, former colleagues, distant relatives, even acquaintances from old friendship. Each inquiry yielded a version of the same theme. Julie was a devoted mother and teacher, but no one could pinpoint any enemies or threats thoughtfully lurking within her everyday life. This was a stark contrast to the growing anxiety, tightening its grip on Hastings' gut. Tension filled the air during a meeting at the station where officers shared their findings from canvassing neighborhoods around the grocery store. Witnesses reported a white van seen parked suspiciously near the market the evening of Julie's disappearance. Hastings felt a pulse of hope amidst the day's failures. Yet after checking registered vehicles in the area, the leads led them to a dead end. The owner was cleared of involvement. A local whose routine was well known among his neighbors. As the week drew to a close, murmurs of doubt crept into the investigation, threatening to wear down the collective resolve of the search teams. The weary looks exchanged among officers echoed Hastings' growing frustration. Just as he began to question whether he'd missed something crucial, a new informant came forward, a teenager who had seen an argument at the market the weekend prior. Their eyes brightened with potential. But here, too, uncertainty loomed. The details were vague. Two figures, faces obscured in shadow, voices raised in muffled frustration. The teenager had thought little of it at the time, chalking it up to nothing more than an ordinary spat. As the report passed through Hastings' hands, he could feel the fragile thread of hope fraying. Something remained just beyond his grasp, buried under layers of mundane truths and illusory normalcy that the townsfolk clung to. Hastings took a deep breath. Dead ends were part of the process. Yet with each one, the urgency to uncover Julie's fate felt greater than ever. The realization set in. A community's silence could be as damning as deception itself. To find Julie, they would need to dare disturb the delicate fabric of Pinewood's peace now stained by an undisclosed horror. A break in the case. Just as despair began to seep into the heart of the investigation, an unexpected call pierced through the tension that enveloped the police station. It was Detective Hastings, busy mapping the interactions and leads from his office, when Officer Reid burst through the door with a glint of urgency in his eyes. "Detective, you need to see this," Reid said, holding a printout in his hands as he handed it over without delay. It was a transcript of a 911 call made several days after Julie's disappearance. A call that had gone unnoticed amidst the clamorous search for the missing woman. Hastings read the details carefully. The caller remained anonymous, a shaky voice disclosing they had seen a woman who looked like she was in trouble being ushered into a car by a man outside Pinewood Market. The timestamp was mere minutes after the last confirmed sighting of Julie, resetting the investigation clock to that critical moment. Even the nondescript details, the make of the car, the man's clothing, could serve as a crucial lead. After reassuring Reid to get the canvassing team back to the scene of the grocery store, Hastings wasted no time in revisiting nearby shops, determined to uncover witnesses who might have missed the first call for information. He felt a nagging chill as he considered how close the pieces were to falling into place. Empowered by the adrenaline coursing through him, Hastings sought to expand beyond the usual parameters of their investigation. This time, he extended their reach to include the surrounding towns. Pinewood was small, but chaos had a way of spreading like wildfire, and he needed to retrieve any scraps of information quickly before the trail grew cold. Hours passed amidst a flurry of activity. Officers flooded the streets in manned phones, calling in neighboring departments for support in tracking down the unidentified caller. Hastings and Reid split the workload, sifting through surveillance footage from gas stations and roadways in the vicinity. Suddenly, a glimmer of something interesting emerged. Cameras caught a white sedan matching the description from the 911 call, turning off Main Street and onto a less traveled road, disappearing from sight. The weight of the moment hung in the air. The detective noted how quickly Pinewood transitioned from peaceful serenity to an unmistakable crossroads of terror. When the footage was analyzed, they were able to spot a pair of distinctive bumper stickers lingering on the vehicle. Hastings' heart quickened. This small detail could prove critical to tracking down the vehicle's owner and perhaps to uncovering the identity of Julie's abductor. As night fell, Hastings felt a deep sense of renewed purpose. Something flickered on the horizon of potential closure. Just when despair threatened to silence the search, a faint glimmer in the darkness promised hope. Whether they would succeed depended on the next series of steps they took, and Hastings was determined to ensure that this time they would rediscover the light that had escaped Pinewood with Julie Anderson. The suspect, with the bright specter of hope revived, Detective Hastings pushed forward with renewed vigor. The footage of the white sedan had led to a crucial development. Within hours, officers traced the car's owner, a man named Aaron Day, a 35-year-old recently moved to Pinewood from a larger city. Day had been living alone in a modest rental house, not far from the grocery store. His past, once a distant whisper among neighbors, quickly shifted into the center of Melrose's widening circle of suspicion. Hastings and his team gathered as much information about Day as possible. A background check returned with a mixed array of several misdemeanors for petty theft and disturbances, but nothing alarmingly violent. However, he had a reputation for being somewhat of a loner, dragging with him the air of unpredictability often reserved for the socially estranged. Hastings couldn't shake the creeping sense that Day's presence was a manipulation of fate. He seemed to have slipped effortlessly into town just before Julie's disappearance, as if the gears of the universe conspired to set this terrible plan into motion. Surveillance footage showed Day's vehicle near the grocery store, not only on the night of Julie's disappearance, but also on several occasions in the days leading up to it. Hastings organized a team to surveil Day's house. They needed to observe his habits, his interactions, and if possible, his ties to Julie. As night fell, Hastings staked out Day's location, watching as the sun cast shadows across the suburban sprawl. The evening unfolded into its usual rhythm. The hum of cars at a distance, the distant laughter of children fading into night, and the low thrum of the investigation lingering in the background. There was a palpable tension in the air as his team noted Day pacing back and forth inside his home. The movement suggested either agitation or restlessness, something that piqued Hastings' instincts. Just as the clock struck 10, a dull light flickered through the window, illuminating Day bent over a table strewn with papers. Hastings felt a chill creep up his spine. Turning on the night vision, the officers were able to confirm that Day was writing feverishly, occasionally glancing up to survey the street, as if he sensed an invisible presence stalking him. It fell to Hastings to determine whether this behavior was innocuous or desperate. The morning sun found Hastings at Day's doorstep, a mixture of apprehension and resolve coiling within him. Whatever happened next would shape the course of the investigation. Knocking firmly, he prepared to face whomever answered the door. A few moments later, Day emerged, visibly startled. Hastings offered a curt introduction, laying out the reason for his visit, noting the car and the security footage. As he engaged Day in conversation, every word from the man's mouth felt rehearsed, as if he knew he was under scrutiny. He spoke quickly, perhaps too quickly, offering mundane justifications and claiming he'd been at home the night of Julie's disappearance. Hastings watched the subtle tremor at the edge of Day's lips, the fleeting shivers in his hand, signs that spoke of anxiety, perhaps guilt. Yet Hastings knew that feelings could deceive. What he needed was definitive proof, a connection between Day and Julie, something that tied him irrevocably to the unfolding nightmare. As they debated the mundane, Hastings sharpened his focus into interrogation mode, reminding himself to carefully observe the threads tying the story together, knowing that time was now an adversary in a desperately spiraling case. The hourglass had turned, and without a doubt, they were inching closer to discovering the truth or unraveling deeper shadows that kept Julie locked away. The trial, months of relentless investigation, culminated in a frenzied opening day for the trial of Aaron Day, the man alleged to have abducted Julie Anderson. The courtroom buzzed with an audience drawn by the chilling nature of the case, where flickers of hope clashed audibly against the palpable tension in the air. Family, friends, and even curious townsfolk filled the seats, casting anxious glances toward the defendant seated at the front. Hastings and his team had worked meticulously to build a solid case against Day, combing through every scrap of evidence like an artist intently crafting a masterpiece. Surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and forensic findings strategically fell into place, serving as a comprehensive mosaic detailing the days leading to Julie's disappearance. The prosecution opened with fervor, presenting Day's questionable history and the pattern of his movements leading up to that fateful night. The prosecutor recounted the chilling 911 call, the anxiety-laden description that spoke of Julie being coerced. Each word thudded against the hearts of those listening, particularly her family, who awaited justice wrapped in dread. Hastings watched from the back, his chest tightening as the prosecutor urged the court to consider the shadows lurking in Day's past. Day's defense attorney countered with attempts to paint the narrative of a misunderstood man, taking aim at the prosecution's reliance on vague connections and circumstantial evidence. As Hastings had feared, the defense proclaimed that Day was merely an easy target, an outsider vulnerable to accusations in a tight-knit community desperate for closure. Witness after witness took the stand, some recounting the last moments they'd seen Julie, while others reflected on Day's puzzling behavior. A chilling moment arose when the 911 call was played, and the courtroom fell into a stunned silence, every listener captured by the raw emotion in the words spoken. Julie's absence loomed large, a ghost hovering in the courtroom, creating a profound ache in the hearts of those who loved her. Days turned into a week of arduous testimony, pulsating with emotion and fragments of hope that rose only to crumble under the weight of rebuttals and cross-examinations. Hastings studied Day intensely, appraising every flicker of his expression. Emotions played across Day's face like a pendulum, swinging from defensiveness to a haunting sheen of fear. Eventually, the defense called for Day himself to take the stand. With a confidence that seemed grotesquely misplaced, he described his life, his choices, and dismissively labeled Julie's deteriorating mental state. He claimed that incited indignation from the crowd. Hastings felt a rush of adrenaline. Day's theatricality only fueled the determination that this narrative would not be the one to disguise the truth. The closing arguments echoed painfully through the room, the prosecutor's words weaving a compelling case for the memories of Julie's laughter and the shadows of her absence. Hastings felt a flicker of hope amidst the anguish, arguing that the community had the right to confront their fears and reclaim the narrative that Day had sought to manipulate. As the jury retreated to deliberate, a collective stillness settled in the courtroom. Hastings held his breath, knowing that the verdict would resonate much deeper than the confines of that room. This moment represented not just judgment, but a community grappling with the aftermath of its hidden darkness. After several tense hours, muffled murmurs saturated the air as the jury returned. The room erupted with a swell of emotion as Julie's friends and family embraced the verdict, their tears mingling with both grief and relief. As the gavel struck down one final time and Day was led away, Hastings felt a profound sense of both closure and reminder. Justice had been served, but Julie's absence was a wound that would ache indefinitely. Pinewood had faced its reckoning, though darkness had infiltrated the community. It could now begin the slow process of healing, sparked by the memory of a light that had shone too briefly, yet bravely. The aftermath. The trial's conclusion cast a complicated shadow over Pinewood, leaving the community grappling with the implications of what had unfolded. What began as a simple, sunlit town now bore the weight of a haunting darkness. The conviction of Aaron Day provided a sense of relief, yet it did little to bridge the chasm left by Julie Anderson's absence. In the weeks following the verdict, Hastings found himself immersed not just in the aftermath of the case, but in the emotional undercurrents rippling through the town. With Day behind bars, residents sought to reclaim the sense of safety that had been shattered, but a lingering uncertainty clouded their newfound resolve. The threat of violence was no longer an abstract concept. It was a palpable reality that had seeped into the fabric of each neighborhood. As autumn leaves turned to rich shades of gold and crimson, Hastings noticed the change in atmosphere around Pinewood. Families were more guarded. Children played in the yard, only with watchful eyes on their parents, and whispered conversations avoided the topic of the trial as if it were a fragile vase, easily shattered by direct mention. For Hastings, the echoes of Julie's laughter haunted the streets, mingling with the vibrant life of the town that had once been untroubled. Hastings attended the community memorial held in honor of Julie, where residents gathered in the park surrounded by softly glowing candles. As families shared stories of how she had touched their lives, Hastings felt the raw emotion wash over the crowd, grief intermingled with gratitude for the lost woman who had inspired countless hearts. Children ran in the background, laughter punctuating the night air, yet the unease was unmistakable. Parents swept their children off to the safety of their arms when the sound of fireworks abruptly burst overhead. In the days that followed, Hastings found himself drawn to the unfinished edges of the case he had needed for closure, where grief still reigned. He reached out to Julie's family, offering any resources they might need as they faced the daunting path of healing. Conversations turned to hopes for memories of Julie to blossom, creating support groups and initiatives aimed at raising awareness about missing persons and domestic violence. She would not become a statistic. Her story would continue to resonate, a reminder of the importance of vigilance and community bonds. As Hastings delved into outreach efforts, he saw how the scars would remain for Pinewood, stretching deep into the hearts of the residents. Every time someone drove past the grocery store where Julie was last seen, a shiver of vulnerability permeated their thoughts. A plague of questions nestled in their minds. Could this happen again? Did we miss the signs? Who could we lose next? Even within the police department, efforts to improve community relations escalated, driven by a newfound urgency to ensure history did not repeat itself. Hastings worked tirelessly to organize neighborhood watch programs, bringing officers and residents together to embrace an ethos of transparency. Together, they forged a framework for vigilance that crawled steadily across Pinewood, creating a new culture defined by connection rather than isolation. Months turned to years, but remnants of Julie's spirit remained, blooming within the very core of the town she loved. Pinewood would never forget her. The consequences of reckoning with darkness, of unearthing shadows that festered beneath the surface, transformed the town. It emerged with resilience, the lessons drawn from their pain igniting a commitment to fostering safety. As Hastings strolled through the now familiar streets, he reflected on the journey they had taken together. Hopes flickered anew where sorrow had once burned, buried yet rising, and the light of community shone more brightly than before. No one wished to feel fear overshadow their lives ever again. They would create a future where Julie's light, a guiding star, could inspire now and always. The forces of darkness had descended upon them, but Pinewood ultimately stood united, ready to face the challenges ahead. Reflection. As night fell over Pinewood, Detective Mark Hastings stood at the edge of the park, reflecting on the journey that had transformed so many lives. The flicker of candles still danced softly in the distance, remnants of the vigil held in memory of Julie Anderson. It was a bittersweet reminder, a celebration of her spirit entwined with the heavy ache of loss. The tranquility of the park belied the turmoil of their past, but also whispered promises of resilience and hope. With every conversation he'd had since Julie's disappearance, every heart-wrenching moment in the courtroom, and every tear shed by her family and friends, Hastings had come to understand the profound ripple effects of one tragic event. Pinewood had collectively navigated the dark underbelly of fear, confronting vulnerabilities that prior remained concealed in the shadow. Grief had allowed beauty to emerge from sorrow. Initiatives born from tragedy were paving paths to advocacy, urging vigilance and community solidarity in confronting the uncomfortable truths that could no longer be ignored. He recognized the power of shared stories that linked them all in an intricate web of compassion, loss, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. There was a resolve now woven into the fabric of Pinewood, one grounded in the legacy of Julie Anderson, a woman who would forever inspire action, connection, and awareness amid turbulent times. Hastings inhaled deeply, the crisp autumn air filling his lungs as he turned to face the town, his heart swelling with a renewed commitment to protect and serve. Pinewood would move forward, forever changed yet steadfast, and Hastings vowed to ensure the light would always shine brighter than the darkness that had threatened to engulf them.